My husband suddenly starts ranting about how he refuses to be the breadwinner for a housewife, spouting things that make no sense. Before I know it, he's packing up my belongings. "What are you doing?" I ask, bewildered. "I'm asking you to leave this house until you realize what you've done," he replies coldly. "What?" I can barely process his words. My name is Mary, a 27-year-old office worker. I recently landed my dream job at a cosmetics company and threw myself into my work with enthusiasm. My dedication paid off. I received excellent feedback from my boss and earned a promotion. For someone my age, my salary is pretty impressive. I've been married to my husband Tom for a year. We're the same age, but he earns less than I do. It doesn't bother me, but I've come to realize that it's a sensitive issue for him. Tom never brings it up directly, but whenever our conversations drift towards work, he quickly changes the subject. I think it reminds him that his salary is lower than mine. He often seems unmotivated about his job, saying, "I don't have a great job, so I've learned to avoid talking about my work too much at home." Despite this, Tom does his share of the housework and is great at cooking and cleaning. He has a gentle nature and we communicate well, so I've always felt that we're a strong couple. But now I'm beginning to wonder if I was the only one who felt that way. One day I wasn't feeling well and experienced severe nausea. Concerned, I went to the hospital and found out I was pregnant. Excited, I immediately shared the news with my husband. He was overjoyed, and seeing his happiness made me even more thrilled. I thought to myself, we're going to build a loving, warm family. Decided to take maternity leave about 6 weeks before my due date, wanting to give myself time to rest since it was my first pregnancy. However, around that time, I noticed a subtle change in my husband's attitude. When he came home one evening, I greeted him with a smile. "Welcome home." He looked at me lounging on the sofa and remarked, relaxing on the sofa again, "Huh, you've got it easy." His tone surprised me. At first, I brushed it off, assuming he was just stressed from work. But as the days passed, his attitude toward me grew colder and more distant. "Hey, where's my dinner?" "Sorry, I'm not feeling well today, so I picked up some pre-made food from the supermarket." "What? You've got to be kidding me. After a long day at work, you're serving me supermarket pre-made food." His sudden outburst caught me off guard, and I was too exhausted to argue. Some days I felt so sick that I could barely do anything. Even the smell of food made me nauseous. On one of those days, I sent my husband a message explaining how I was feeling and asked if he could either cook for himself or grab something to eat. He didn't respond, but I saw that he'd read the message, so I assumed everything was fine. I crawled into bed and fell asleep for a few hours. When I woke up, it was midnight. I got up to go to the bathroom and noticed the light was on in the living room, with voices drifting from inside. Curious, I walked in and was surprised to find that my husband had brought some of his colleagues home with him. "Oh, look, the selfish princess has finally woken up," one of his colleagues said with a smirk. Another added, "Sorry to disturb you." I greeted them politely, but I was shocked. I quickly pulled my husband aside into the hallway. "What's going on? Why would you bring people over this late?" He shrugged. "What's the big deal? We went out for drinks, and when that wasn't enough, I invited them back here." "You know I'm pregnant, right?" I said, trying to keep my frustration in check. "So what? I'm not asking you to do anything risky. But could you please consider the impact this is having on my mental health?" "What? You're overreacting. If you had cooked dinner, I wouldn't have needed to go out for drinks with them, so you're the one responsible for me bringing them home." His reasoning made no sense to me. If you have so much energy, why don't you make something to eat and serve it to everyone? "I can't, I'm still feeling sick." "You're just being selfish. You're ruining the fun for everyone. Go back to your bedroom and get some rest." With that, he turned and went back into the living room. I couldn't take it anymore. Frustrated, I decided to move back to my parents' house. I explained the situation to my obstetrician and asked if I could give birth near them. Fortunately, she knew an obstetrician close to my parents' place and promptly provided me with a letter of introduction. I left a note on the table saying, "I'm going home for a while to give birth." My husband immediately started calling and messaging, but I chose to ignore him. About a week later, I received a message from him saying, "I'm sorry. You can stay at your parents' house and rest before the birth." Although I still hadn't forgiven him, I was relieved to hear his apology. I stayed at my parents' house and it made a huge difference. I felt much better. My nausea subsided and my appetite returned. After that, I gave birth to a healthy baby girl. My parents were thrilled to welcome their granddaughter, and my husband came to the hospital as well. He was overjoyed to hold our daughter, exclaiming, "She's so cute," and showed genuine concern for my health. I felt relieved, thinking that he had returned to his caring and gentle self. Once I recovered, I spent about 2 weeks at my parents' house before moving back to the home I shared with my husband. When I returned, he eagerly took on the task of feeding our daughter after work. Initially, he was very involved, helping with diaper changes and bath times. His enthusiasm and support were incredibly encouraging. I felt relieved, believing that my husband and I would be able to live together harmoniously once more. However, about 2 months after our daughter was born, his attitude began to shift again. It seemed to be related to our baby's increased nighttime crying. Until then, she had been sleeping soundly, but now her cries were frequent and disruptive, waking us up regularly throughout the night. The lack of sleep began to take a toll on my husband, who became increasingly stressed and less supportive with childcare. He even said, "I'll sleep on the couch," and left me to handle everything on my own. Additionally, he started coming home late from work, which only deepened my mistrust and concern about our relationship. Once I saw him acting this way, I began to notice many other things about him. I started expressing my frustration about his lack of involvement in raising our child. My husband appeared increasingly stressed, and one day he made a startling comment. "Who do you think is providing for you?" "What?" I asked, confused. "It's because of me that you're able to stay home and live comfortably. You should show more respect for your husband." I was taken aback. "I appreciate that you were supportive in the beginning, but lately, when our daughter cries, you just brush it off and say, 'Hey, she's crying,' without offering any help." "No, that's not what I'm talking about," he snapped. "What do you mean by silly?" I asked, puzzled. "I'm the boss in this house and you're showing me disrespect." "I don't understand what you're referring to," I said, genuinely confused. "I'm the one who earns the money, so you need to show me more respect." He then began to say things that didn't make sense, like, "I'm not going to be the breadwinner for a housewife." Without warning, he started packing up my belongings. "What are you doing?" I asked, bewildered. "I'm asking you to leave this house until you regret what you've done," he said as he hastily stuffed my clothes into a bag and tried to force me out. "Fine, I'll go. Just let me pack my things myself," I responded, starting to fold my clothes and place them in my bag. Once I was done packing, I picked up my daughter and saw him throw my box out the front door. "Come back when you've had time to reflect on your actions," he said, and then he locked the front door behind him. Left with no other option, I returned to my parents' house. After leaving my daughter in my mother's care, I went to the city office to pick up the divorce papers. The next day, I went back to my husband's house and rang the doorbell. "Oh, you're back already? I suppose you've realized you can't manage without me. All I need is for you to show me you're sorry. If you get down on your knees, I might forgive you," my husband said with a smirk. Ignoring his demands, I pulled the divorce papers from my bag and handed them to him. "What? Divorce papers? Why? I thought you were sorry," he exclaimed, confused. "After everything you've said and done, I have nothing to apologize for. I haven't done anything wrong. I can't stay married to you any longer," I replied firmly. My husband was clearly taken aback, not expecting me to follow through with the divorce. He then said something that made little sense. But you're okay with this. It's going to be tough for you as a single mother. You don't even have a job. How will you support your daughter? What are you talking about? I didn't lose my job, I replied. What? You've been home all this time. I thought you quit because you got pregnant. Oh, so that's what you've assumed. Who said I quit my job? I'm just on maternity and childcare leave. What? It seemed my husband believed that women automatically quit their jobs after giving birth. Oh no, I thought you had become a stay-at-home wife, he said, realizing his misunderstanding. Oh, I see. So you thought you could one-up me, I said. My husband's face went pale with shock. It was clear he was deeply hurt. He had always been proud, and when we were both working, my higher income seemed to bother him. I guess he just assumed I had quit my job rather than being on leave. I was thoroughly disgusted by his behavior. Husbands and wives should be equal, I told him. I'm exhausted from dealing with your inferiority complex. I never cared about who made more money. Realizing the gravity of his actions, my husband broke down in tears and pleaded, I'm sorry. Please don't divorce me. But by then it was too late. I asked him to sign the divorce papers and left the house. We later finalized the divorce through our lawyers. I had recorded my ex-husband's verbal abuse as a precaution, so I was able to use it as evidence to secure alimony for the harassment I endured. Without my income, he couldn't afford the rent on our apartment, so he had to move to a cheaper place. Interestingly, when he brought his colleagues over that night, they had no idea I was pregnant. When they saw my belly, they were all taken aback. After our divorce, rumors spread at his workplace that he'd been dumped by his wife. My ex-husband must be feeling a lot of shame now, and he totally deserves it. Meanwhile, I took maternity leave and returned to work, now living at my parents' house. They've been incredibly supportive as I balance work and raising my child. Although my marriage didn't work out, I'm happier than ever thanks to the fulfilling work I love and the joy on my daughter's face. I'm committed to my career and excited to watch my daughter grow up. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video.
If you dislike me that much, then don't bother coming back to this house. Just stay in the hospital forever, useless daughter-in-law. With a laugh, my mother-in-law Susie shouted this and threw a cup of steaming black liquid at me. I instinctively tried to dodge, but some splashed onto my hands and feet. Packing for my long hospital stay, I felt the hot coffee burning my skin. What are you doing, Susie? That's boiling hot. Susie looked pleased with herself, ignoring my pain. Oh, I just wanted you to enjoy a nice hot coffee before you leave for the hospital. Looks like my hand slipped. It was clearly intentional, and I might have been badly burned if more had hit me. If I stay in this dangerous house, my illness could only get worse. I'm going back to my parents' home. I'll never return to this house, so rest easy. Susie smiled in a smug and satisfied way. I don't care what you're sick with. Just make sure you don't come back. I don't want to see your face. Watching her sneering, I felt the anger drain out of me and started to laugh instead. Whether my treatment goes well or not, I won't be coming to see you. I'll never haunt you either. With that, I left, my bags packed, and didn't return to that house ever again. After that, Susie lost everything she had. My name is Emily, and I'm a 46-year-old company employee. Shortly after marrying, I moved in with my husband's family. My husband, Mark, lives away for work, returning about once a month, and I live with our son, James. Mark has been away for about 3 years due to work and only comes home once a month. While Mark is away, Susie has become more malicious, and it's been a real struggle for me. Since my son is my ally, he helps ease the burden a little, though that makes Susie even angrier. James hates me because of you, Emily. What are you teaching him? She often blames me for her strained relationship with James. Mom hasn't done anything wrong. Grandma, you're the one being mean. James would say this honestly, which only seemed to aggravate her more. When James was at school, she'd tell me things like this. He says sweet things to your face, but he tells me that he wants you to divorce his father and leave. She'd gloat as she spoke, but I knew James would never say that. Even if he did, he wouldn't confide in her. She had never once helped with raising him, and he never liked her much. even as a small child. Now, with Mark away and her treatment of me worsening, James has grown even more distant from her. Whenever I mentioned her behavior to Mark, he wouldn't believe me.
Emily, you're just overreacting.
Mark thought I was exaggerating since he wasn't there to witness her behavior. Before, she's simply complaining about the food I made. Now she throws it in the trash, loudly accusing me of trying to poison her.
You're trying to raise my blood pressure so I get sick.
The sudden outburst shocked me so much that I was at a loss for words.
There's nothing wrong with this food, Grandma. It tastes good.
Susie scowled at James and accused me of trying to make her sick while Mark wasn't around.
I know you're trying to make me sick while Mark's away.
She'd say this with conviction and then stomp back to her room. For a moment I wondered if her outbursts were signs of dementia.
She's just being mean because Dad's not here. Grandma's always had a bad attitude.
Mark, for his part, remained blissfully unaware, treating her words with minimal concern. Meanwhile, I carried the load, keeping the peace in our tense home. When my father-in-law Brian retired and started staying home, I felt a slight reprieve.
I'll keep an eye on things here while you're at work, Emily.
He even apologized, saying he tried to tell Mark about his mother's behavior, but it never got through.
Mark's always been her favorite. Nothing I say changes that.
Mark had been an only child doted on by his mother, while his father kept a distance, remaining critical. Brian was my one ally, and I was grateful for his presence. A few years later, I gave birth to our son, hoping that a grandchild might soften her attitude, but it only made things worse.
Just because you had a baby doesn't mean I'm going to help.
She declared this coldly, never once lifting a finger to help with James. The few times I asked for assistance, she refused, saying it wasn't her responsibility. My husband was stunned, not understanding why she was so heartless toward our son.
Can't you help a little, Mom?
I raised Mark on my own without anyone's help. If you can't handle it, maybe you shouldn't have kids.
Her cold response angered Mark, and even Brian looked at her with disappointment. Despite her behavior, my husband and father-in-law continued to help me, so I was able to manage. When I returned to work after my maternity leave, Brian helped with daycare pickups. Susie, however, was as critical as ever.
Leaving such a young child at daycare is shameful.
If she thought it was wrong, she could have offered to help, but she didn't. Instead, she'd go out and leave me to manage it all. I considered being a stay-at-home mom, but staying in the same house as her all day was unbearable. Besides, I had career goals, and I wanted to save for a future home for us. With Brian's support, I managed to work and care for James. James adored him, and they shared many happy memories together. But about 5 years ago, he passed away unexpectedly. While out on a trip with some former co-workers, he had collapsed and was taken to the hospital. My husband and I rushed to see him, but he was already unconscious and in critical condition. Susie, however, never even visited him. I was furious, thinking that, despite their differences, she should have been by his side. He passed away without ever regaining consciousness. Susie only showed up at the funeral, where she put on a dramatic display crying for sympathy. It was obvious to me and James that she was putting on a show.
She's just pretending to care, Mom.
Even at a young age, he could see right through her.
It's because of Emily's greasy cooking that he got sick.
She had the audacity to blame me for Brian's health, but nobody believed her. Family members who knew her well just gave awkward smiles. She eventually fell silent, realizing nobody was on her side.
Emily, don't just stand there. Get the funeral arrangements ready.
She barked orders at me, while our relatives offered me comforting words. When the funeral was over, I felt a deep sadness. Brian had been my only real support in that household. Without him, I feared Susie's behavior would only get worse. After Brian's passing, my husband Mark seemed more concerned about his mother's well-being.
I know she and Dad didn't get along, but she must be feeling lonely now. Can you keep an eye on her, Emily?
Mark thought she'd be grieving, but I saw her acting quite the opposite. She seemed pleased. With her husband gone, she no longer had to hide her malice toward me. She only behaved nicely when Mark was around, but behind his back, she continued to taunt me in new ways.
Your cooking is always the same. Can't you make something different?
She'd criticized my meals, then later complained to Mark, suggesting I was trying to poison her. One evening, I made a separate dish for her, hoping to satisfy her, only for her to accuse me of adding something suspicious.
Emily is serving me a separate dish. What if she's put something in it?
Mark laughed it off, reassuring her it was just her imagination. After that, I'd eat the separate dish myself to prove there was nothing wrong. She eventually ate the original meal I'd made, but not without sneering at me.
Everything you make is terrible. You're really such a useless daughter-in-law.
She now had the money from Brian's estate and seemed to be enjoying herself, though not contributing financially. She often hinted that she'd keep her inheritance for herself and expected us to pay all household expenses.
I'm going to save my inheritance for my future. Don't expect me to contribute to household costs.
Her tone made it clear that she intended to keep her money to herself. I was irritated, knowing she'd saved nothing, despite Mark giving her money on the side. Mark was unaware she'd been collecting his allowance while hoarding her own funds. Soon after, Mark had to relocate for work again, meaning I was left with her full time. With Mark gone, she continued to criticize me daily, though James, my son, took my side whenever he was home. I didn't want him to worry, especially with his upcoming exams, so I tried to keep him out of the household tension. One day, Susie demanded a significant amount of money from me, her expression showing little gratitude.
Mark's gone, so it's your responsibility now, Emily. I need $1,000 right away.
It's late and the bank is closed. What do you even need that much money for right now? She pointed out that the ATM was open 24 hours, surprising me with her familiarity with banking options. When I declined to go, she scowled.
You're such a useless daughter-in-law. I don't need someone like you around here.
I gave her the $300 I had on hand, and she stormed out to use the ATM without so much as a thank you. I grew curious and began to suspect she might be hiding financial troubles from us. Despite my concerns, I didn't want to worry Mark and tried to handle things on my own. I kept helping James prepare for his exams, and eventually he was accepted into his preferred high school. But just as I thought I'd finally be able to breathe, I began to feel unwell. A doctor's visit led to further testing, and to my shock, they found something serious. I informed Mark, and he immediately wanted to transfer back to be closer to me and help with my treatment.
If this is serious, Emily, I'll talk to the company. I'll come back to be there for you.
The diagnosis was indeed serious, and I needed treatment right away. Mark was visibly shaken, as were both my son and I. We need to tell James. He's going to notice if I'm gone in the hospital for a while. We told James, who was naturally upset, but tried to be strong. Treatment will help. I just need you to be patient with me while I go through this.
Mom, I know you'll be okay. I'm here with you and we'll get through it together.
I asked them both to keep my condition a secret from Susie. If she found out, I feared her cruelty would only worsen. When we returned home that night, Susie immediately noticed Mark's somber expression.
Why do you look so down, Mark? Is something wrong?
Mark assured her it was nothing, though she gave us a skeptical look. That night, we told James about the situation, warning him not to mention it to his grandmother.
Don't worry, I'd never tell her. She'd just make things worse.
Mark seemed taken aback by how honestly James spoke about his grandmother.
Really? I didn't think she was that bad.
Mark seemed clueless about his mother's true nature, even after all this time. I began making arrangements for my treatment, knowing I'd be away for a while. During this time, Susie seemed to suspect something was up, and she accused me of having an affair.
You've been coming home early from work lately. Who are you sneaking around with?
I was dumbfounded, not even sure how to respond to her wild accusation. She even claimed that Mark's recent visit was due to our supposed marital problems.
Mark wouldn't be here if it wasn't about your affair. I know what you're up to.
I'm not having an affair, and it's none of your business anyway. I tried to deflect, but she continued to rant about my supposed betrayal. Despite everything, I held back from telling her the truth about my illness, not wanting to give her the satisfaction. I prepared to go back to my parents' home, where James would join me while I was in the hospital. When I told her of my plans, she sneered, believing I was leaving due to my imaginary affair.
You're only leaving because you got caught. Don't think you'll ever come back here.
I assured her she'd never see me again and left with my son James, feeling relief. As we packed up to go, she demanded I still leave her dinner ready.
Leave my dinner before you go.
You can make your own food from now on. I'm done with you. Together, my son and I walked out of the house, ready to leave her and that life behind. As my son and I left, she yelled after us, telling us not to come back, but James and I were resolute in our decision. I felt a sense of dread about my marriage, wondering if I would be able to continue with Mark or if this would mean the end. Yet before anything, I had to focus on my health. When my parents welcomed us, they were shocked to hear about everything Susie had done. They agreed to support me through my treatment and were deeply angered by Mark's inaction. Mark and I will talk about everything once my treatment is done. My parents, though skeptical, understood that my health was the priority. The day before my hospitalization, I thought Mark would still be in his work city, but he appeared at my parents' home. I thought you'd be back tomorrow. Did you mix up the date? Mark, looking on the verge of tears, lowered his head, showing remorse.
Emily, I'm so sorry. I'm cutting ties with my mother. I had no idea she was doing such horrible things to you.
I was confused about how he knew, but I soon learned he'd discovered the truth.
I set up a camera in your room. Mom kept insisting you were hiding something, and I got paranoid.
The shock on my face must have been obvious. You thought I was cheating, even though I'm sick? Mark apologized repeatedly, explaining he'd checked the camera and seen her throw scalding coffee on me. My parents were furious, scolding Mark for allowing his mother's influence to cause such distrust. My anger softened as I watched him admit his mistakes.
I told her I'm done helping, Emily. I'll stay by your side from now on.
He explained that he confronted his mother and planned to cut ties, finally aware of her true nature. It's too late to ask her to apologize. I don't want to see her. I found myself openly acknowledging just how twisted his mother's behavior was, which I'd previously hidden from him. Mark promised he'd never give her another cent, and I remembered her frequent demands for money. What did she do with all that money you gave her? She was always at the ATM like she had debts to pay. Mark, too, was unsure, though he had tried to find out in the past. Just then, as if summoned by our conversation, Susie burst into my parents' home.
Don't cut me off, Mark. I need your help.
Coldly, I responded to her, reminding her of her words about never wanting to see me again. You didn't want to see me again, so why are you here? She ignored me, clinging to Mark.
Mom, I already told you I'm cutting you off. If you want me to listen, you'll have to apologize to Emily.
She glanced at me angrily, yet was unwilling to even lower her head. She continued to plead with Mark, who stood firm on his decision to distance himself from her. Why don't you tell us what you need all this money for anyway? After a moment, she revealed she'd lost all her money in online trading and had racked up debt. She looked ashamed, admitting she started when she inherited Brian's money. She'd initially made some profit, then lost it all, along with everything else. So that's why you were taking all that money from Mark, because you didn't want to spend any of your own. She seemed humiliated, but confirmed it. James entered the room, just returning home, and had clearly heard everything.
I never trust someone who throws hot coffee on my sick mom.
My son's bluntness changed the tone entirely, and Mark also turned to his mother coldly.
Mom, I'm sorry, but James is right. I can't help you anymore.
Mark explained to her firmly that he was done giving her any more financial support. She begged him one last time, trying to insist she could repay everything if he just gave her one more chance. Mark was unmoved, telling her it was time for her to take responsibility. She stormed out in anger, still refusing to admit her wrongdoing. I was finally at peace as she left, though I felt a pang of sadness for Mark, who lost his trust in his mother. After this, I went into treatment supported by Mark, my parents, and James, who helped me recover. With their encouragement, I endured the grueling process, determined to live for myself and my family. Months later, my health returned, and I was discharged. I'm only here today because of all of you. Thank you for being my rock. James had grown, now a young adult in college, and Mark and my parents had grown close too. As I recovered, I couldn't help but think back to Susie's last words. I was happy, free from her insults, but occasionally I still felt a lingering sadness for her situation. We later learned she was living with a relative, working part-time to pay off her debts. James once spotted her being reprimanded by a younger manager, which felt a little ironic.
She was still snapping back, just like always. I almost felt bad, but not really.
In the end, I returned to work part-time, surrounded by a family who truly cared for me. I vowed to live well and focus on my loved ones, leaving behind the painful memories of Susie's actions. And as time passed, I found peace, grateful for every moment and for the strength we had all found together.